Kong Hierin smiled the way expensive knives look before they cut, beautiful, polished, and already moving. She found Zuri Coleman standing in the corridor outside the studio fitting room, arms full of fabric samples, and she said it so casually it almost sounded kind. "Oh, it's just a small family gathering. Very relaxed. Don't stress about dressing up. You'd look out of place in anything too formal anyway." Zuri believed her. That was the mistake that changed everything, because 3 hours later, Zuri walked through the front doors of the Kong estate and stepped into 400 of the most powerful, dangerous, and beautifully dressed people in all of South Korea. And every single pair of eyes in that ballroom turned toward her jeans, her plain white blouse, and the quiet devastation spreading across her face before she could stop it. If that had happened to you, if someone smiled at your face and set fire to your dignity behind your back, what would you have done? If this story is hitting something real inside you, subscribe to this channel right now and follow every part to the end. Drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled, because the best parts are still coming, and you don't want to miss a single moment of what happens next. The dress took Zuri 3 weeks to finish, not because it was complicated, though it was, structurally, the most demanding thing she had built in 4 years of working for Min Ara's studio. The internal boning had to sit invisible against the silk without pulling. The hand-stitched beading along the collar took 11 hours across 2 nights, crouched under a magnifying lamp until her neck ached and her vision blurred. She remade the sleeves twice because the first set caught the light wrong. Not dramatically wrong, just slightly. Just enough that Zuri could see it even if no one else could. That was the problem with caring too much about work that had someone else's name on it. She cared anyway. She always had. Min Ara's studio occupied the 4th and 5th floors of a building in Gangnam that smelled permanently of dry cleaning solvent and someone else's ambition. The name on the door, Min Ara Atelier, had been there for 7 years, and in those 7 years it had swallowed 3 junior designers whole, kept 2 more in a kind of decorative captivity where they were useful but invisible, and built its reputation on a simple, brutal arrangement. Zuri designed, Min Ara signed, and the world never knew the difference. Zuri had told herself it was temporary when she was 26. She was 31 now. The client request had come through Min Ara's assistant on a Tuesday morning, dropped onto Zuri's desk with a yellow sticky note that said only, "Kong family. Important. Don't mess it up." The brief underneath specified a custom evening gown for Madame Kong Sun-hee to be worn at a private family celebration. Budget? Open. Timeline? 3 weeks. Consultation at the estate. Min Ara had smiled her way through the initial client call, said all the right things about creative vision and personal attention to detail, and then walked directly into Zuri's workspace and said, "You're going. I have the Jeju retreat." There was no question in it. Zuri looked at the brief. She looked at Min Ara's back as she was already walking out. "What aesthetic direction?" Zuri asked. "Something that makes a 70-year-old woman look like she still runs the room." Min Ara paused at the doorframe without turning around. "Which she does. So don't embarrass me." That was the entire creative brief. Zuri drove to the estate alone in a company car that smelled of pine air freshener and had a broken heater. The Kong property sat behind walls the color of old stone, set into a hillside north of the city where the air was colder and quieter, and you got the feeling the neighborhood had an unwritten policy about noise. A security team met her at the gate. Not aggressive, professional, which was somehow more unnerving. They checked her name against a list, examined her equipment case without touching her, and escorted her through a garden that was immaculate in the way that cost serious money to maintain. Madame Kong Sun-hee was already in the sitting room when they brought Zuri through. She was smaller than Zuri had imagined. Seated in a chair by the window, posture straight without effort, hair silver and pinned back, wearing a simple cream blouse and dark trousers and no jewelry except a single thin watch on her left wrist. She looked like a woman who had stopped needing to prove anything to anyone approximately 30 years ago. She looked up when Zuri entered, and she held eye contact, not aggressively, just steadily, for long enough that Zuri felt herself measured and catalogued before a single word passed between them. "You're the designer," Madame Kong said. It was not a question. "Yes." Zuri set her case down carefully. "Zuri Coleman, I'll be handling your commission personally. Min Ara's name is on my contract." "Yes." Something shifted in the older woman's expression. Not quite a smile. More like recognition. "Sit down," she said. "Tell me what you're thinking." That was the meeting Zuri had not prepared for. Not the measurements and the fabric swatches and the structured professionalism she'd rehearsed in the car, but a real conversation, an actual exchange, where Madame Kang asked pointed questions and listened to the answers with genuine attention and pushed back twice when Zuri's instincts leaned too conservative. "I am not attending this event to disappear into the background," she said at one point, dryly. "I've been doing that for 50 years and I've decided it's boring." Zuri laughed. "A real one, not the polite version." Madame Kang tilted her head. "You have good instincts," she said. "Trust them more than you currently do." Zuri drove back to the studio and started the dress from scratch, throwing out the safer sketch she'd prepared and beginning again from the conversation instead. She didn't tell Min Ara she'd redesigned it from the ground up. Min Ara never asked. The 3 weeks were a closed room, Zuri inside it alone with the silk and the deadline and the growing, uncomfortable feeling that this particular dress was going to matter in ways she couldn't calculate yet. She worked late most nights. She ate bad takeout at her cutting table. She removed the sleeves twice. She burned one cuff with the iron at 2 in the morning and made a sound she was not proud of, then fixed it and kept going. When she finally delivered the finished gown, packaged, pressed, and carried personally to the estate because she did not trust a courier with 3 weeks of her life, the assistant who received it said nothing useful. She signed the delivery form and closed the door. Zuri drove back to the studio. She told herself the work was done. It wasn't. The invitation arrived through Min Ara's office 4 days later. The Kang family birthday gala, 1 week out, request for the designer's attendance. Min Ara looked at the card for a long moment, then set it on Zuri's desk without explanation. "They want whoever made the dress," she said. There was something tight around her mouth. "That's you." Zuri held the card. Heavy stock. The Kang family seal embossed in dark ink. "Should I go?" Obviously. Min Ara was already moving away. "Represent the studio professionally." Zuri started to ask about attire, about what level of formality she should expect, about any guidance at all. But Min Ara had already rounded the corner, and Zuri knew from experience that chasing her down the hallway would produce nothing useful. She almost asked the assistant. She almost went online and searched for images of previous Kang events. She almost did the sensible thing. Instead, Kang Hye-rin found her first. She appeared in the studio corridor that same afternoon, moving through the space with the ease of someone accustomed to entering rooms where she was not necessarily welcome but was too well dressed to be stopped. She had the kind of face that photographed beautifully and was slightly harder in person. She smiled at Zuri with every muscle except the ones that usually mean it. "You must be Zuri," she said, with the specific warmth of someone who already knows your name and has already decided what to do with you. "I'm Hye-rin, Taejin's cousin." Zuri shifted the bolt of fabric in her arms. "Hi. I heard you made Auntie's dress. She's absolutely obsessed with it." Hye-rin's smile widened in a way that didn't reach anything. "I'm sure you're nervous about the event. It can be overwhelming if you don't know what to expect." "A little," Zuri admitted. "Oh, don't be." Hye-rin waved one hand, small gesture, practiced casualness. "It's genuinely very low-key. The family hates stuffy events. It'll just be close family and a few friends. Very relaxed atmosphere. Honestly, if you show up overdressed, you'll look like you're trying too hard, and that's the one thing nobody in that circle respects." She tilted her head, sympathetic expression perfectly calibrated. "Something casual, comfortable. It's really more of a dinner than a gala." Zuri looked at her. Something moved at the edge of her instincts, quiet and unnamed. "That's helpful," she said. "Of course." Hye-rin's smile didn't waver. "We're glad you're coming." She left. Her heels clicked down the corridor and the smell of her perfume lingered for a minute after she was gone. Something expensive and slightly cold, like flowers kept in a refrigerator. Zuri stood there for a moment with the bolt of fabric and the thing crawling around the edges of her gut that she could not name and chose not to follow. She should have followed it. The night of the event, Zuri stood in front of her bathroom mirror in her apartment and told herself she looked fine. The jeans were dark and well-fitted. The white blouse was silk, not cotton, a small private concession to the occasion. Her hair was up. Her earrings were real gold, a birthday gift from her mother 6 years ago. She looked like herself, which she had been trained by 31 years of being herself to believe was probably not quite enough, but would have to do. The car service arrived at 7:45. The driver said nothing, which Zuri interpreted as neutral. It was not neutral. The estate at night was a different world than the estate in daylight. The approach alone, the long drive lined with lights, the sound of a string quartet carrying out through the cold air before she could see the building, should have told her something. She processed these details the way you process information right before something bad happens. She noticed them, she filed them, and she told herself they probably meant nothing. Then the front doors opened. The entrance hall was full of women in floor-length gowns. Not most of the women. All of the women. Every single person visible from the doorway was formally dressed, jeweled, and oriented toward whatever hierarchy this kind of gathering ran on. The men were in dark suits, some of them bespoke in the way that meant serious money, and the room had a low electric hum of power and social calculation that Zuri recognized from exactly nowhere in her experience because she had never been in a room like this in her life. She stopped walking. Her brain performed a rapid and brutal inventory. Jeans, white blouse, gold studs, flat shoes because she hadn't wanted to deal with heels on an unfamiliar floor. A woman near the entrance noticed her first, then the woman next to that woman. The attention moved across the room in that specific way. Not loudly, not cruelly, just efficiently. The way attention always moves when something stands out against an expected backdrop. Heads turned, eyes catalogued. A murmur started somewhere to her left, quiet enough to be deniable. Someone laughed. It was not kind. Zuri did not move. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a specific, pressurized way that she associated with the very worst moments of her life, the ones she had spent years learning not to show on her face. Her jaw set. Her eyes stayed level. The room swam slightly at the edges. She was going to turn around. She had already decided that. She would go back through those doors and get back in the car and figure out the professional consequences later because there was no version of staying in this room that was survivable, and she needed to leave before she started to cry in front of 400 people who would remember it. She turned. He was already walking toward her. Kang Tae-jin moved through a room full of powerful people the way water moves through rock. Not by force exactly, but by complete and total indifference to resistance. He was not running. He was not rushing. He simply crossed the ballroom floor with the absolute certainty of a man who had decided where he was going and had not left room in his mind for any other possibility. He was wearing a dark suit, no tie. A small detail that told Zuri, in the half second she had to absorb it, that he was the only person in the room who had the status to dress exactly as he pleased. He reached her before she could reach the door. He said nothing for a moment. He looked at her, directly, without the social deflection people use to soften awkward moments. And his expression was unreadable in the way that some faces become unreadable when the person behind them is very carefully deciding something. Then he said quietly, so that only she could hear it, "Come with me." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't a command either. It was something in between, the kind of sentence that leaves the other person the dignity of choice while making the right choice very clear. Zuri looked at him. She looked at the room behind him, the 400 faces, and the quiet, devastating laughter, and the weight of being wrong in a place that punishes being wrong. She said nothing. She went with him. He took her toward the terrace doors at the far end of the ballroom, walking at a pace that was neither rushed nor apologetic, and the crowd parted for him without discussion. Not because anyone stepped aside dramatically, but because standing in Kang Tae-jin's path without a good reason was apparently not something people in this room were in the habit of doing. Zuri stayed half a step behind him and kept her face still and counted her own breaths and did not look at anyone. They stepped through the terrace doors into the cold night air. Seoul spread out below them, all light and distance, the city going on forever in every direction, indifferent to everything happening inside the room behind them. The air smelled like winter coming, and the faint sharpness of expensive gardens maintained past the season they were meant for. Tae-jin stopped at the railing. He didn't look at her immediately. He looked out at the city. "My cousin told you it was casual," he said. It was not a question. Zuri's breath came out slowly. She said it was a small family dinner. He said nothing. His jaw moved slightly. "She's good at that," he said finally, making cruelty sound like consideration. Zuri looked at the side of his face, The set of it, the controlled anger underneath the control. She decided to be direct because there was nothing left to lose. Why did you walk across the room? He turned to look at her then, not the way men usually looked at her. Not assessing, not performing, not deciding. Just looking, the way you look at something when you're trying to understand it honestly. Because you designed my mother's dress, he said. Zuri blinked. Min Ara. Min Ara presented the dress. You made it. Something shifted in his expression. I know the difference. My mother knows the difference. It took her 3 minutes of conversation with you to know whose hands built what she was wearing. Zuri was quiet for a moment. The city hummed below them. Nobody's ever said that, she said, out loud. Then the people around you have poor instincts. He said it plainly, without drama. You designed something extraordinary. My mother is not easily impressed. You impressed her. Her Zuri gripped the railing. She was not going to fall apart on a terrace in front of a man she'd met 4 minutes ago. She was absolutely not going to do that. Hierin, she started. I'll handle Hierin. I don't need you to. I know you don't. He said it without impatience. I'm handling her because what she did was deliberate and because this is my family's event and she does not get to use it as a weapon. That's separate from what you're capable of. Zuri turned to look at him fully. He held the look. I don't know what you want from me, she said. Nothing you're not willing to give. He said it simply, like a statement of fact. Tonight, I want you to walk back into that room with me. That's all. She looked at the door behind them, at the city in front of them, at the space between where she was and everywhere she had never let herself believe she could belong. I'm wearing jeans, she said. Something crossed his face, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one, the first real thing she'd seen from him. I know, he said. You're also the only person in that room who built something with her hands this year. The jeans are a secondary issue. Zuri looked at him for a long moment. She was still afraid. She did not pretend otherwise, not to herself. But she was also something else now, something smaller and hotter and harder than fear, sitting in her chest like an ember that Hyarin's cruelty had tried to extinguish and had accidentally made brighter instead. She let go of the railing. All right, she said. They walked back through the terrace doors together, and the room turned to look, and this time Zuri kept her eyes straight ahead and her spine straight, and she did not count her breaths because she didn't need to. She was not safe. She was not comfortable. She did not belong here yet. But she was still standing, and the night was not over, and somewhere behind her Kang Hye-rin was watching from across the ballroom with an expression that had begun, very slowly, to look like the wrong kind of surprise. The room had not stopped watching. That was the first thing Zuri registered when they came back through the terrace doors. Not the music, not the chandeliers, not the smell of cold air mixing with warm perfume and catered food and old money. Just the watching, the quality of it. 400 people who had all made the same calculation the moment they saw her walk back in beside Kang Tai-jin, and whose expressions had shifted in that particular way. Expressions shift when the math stops adding up the way it was supposed to. Tai-jin did not acknowledge the room. He moved through it the same way he had moved through it before, without apology, without performance. And Zuri kept pace beside him and told herself to breathe normally, and almost managed it. They stopped near the center of the hall. A server appeared with 2 glasses. Tae-jin took one, offered Zuri the other without asking if she wanted it, and she took it because her hands needed something to do. You don't have to stay close to me, he said, quietly enough that it was only for her. But you're welcome to. Zuri looked at the glass in her hand. Is this you being considerate or strategic? Can't it be both? She looked up at him. I was looking straight ahead at the room, jaw relaxed, the particular stillness of a man who had spent years learning how to be watched without showing that he noticed. It can be both, she said. I just want to know which one is louder. He was quiet for a beat. Tonight, considerate. She believed him. She wasn't sure she should. Across the room she could see Hye-rin. The woman had repositioned herself near a cluster of older guests, still smiling, still performing the warmth she'd used in the studio corridor. But her eyes kept finding Zuri and Tai-jin with the regularity of someone tracking an investment they'd watched go wrong in real time. Beside her stood a woman Zuri didn't recognize. Tall, composed, wearing a gown the color of champagne that had probably cost more than Zuri's rent. And that woman was not smiling at all. She was watching Taijin with the particular expression of someone who had expected to be standing where Zuri was standing right now. Zuri filed that away. A hand touched her elbow, light, deliberate, and warm. She turned. Madame Kang Sun-hee stood beside her, and for a moment Zuri forgot about everything else because the older woman was wearing the dress, and seeing it on a body in a room full of light was completely different from seeing it on a dress form in a quiet studio. The silk moved when she moved. The beading along the collar caught the chandelier light and held it differently than any artificial illumination, the way hand-stitched work always does when it's been done with enough patience to earn it. It was the dress Zuri had rebuilt from scratch on a Tuesday night because the first version was safe and the second version was honest, and looking at it now, she felt the specific vertigo of making something that turned out to be exactly what it was supposed to be. "You're staring at the collar," Madame Kang said. "I burned the cuff at 2 in the morning and had to redo it." Zuri said it before she thought about it. "I'm checking the repair." "Where?" "Left side, third bead cluster from the shoulder seam." Madame Kang tilted her chin slightly, examining the spot with the focused attention of someone who knew what they were looking at. "I can't see it." "You won't, but I know it's there." The older woman looked at her, that same quality of attention she'd had in the sitting room, measuring, present, without pretense. "That's the difference," she said, "between people who make things and people who sell things. The makers always know where they struggled." Taijin said nothing. He had stepped a half-pace back and was watching his mother, the way grown children watch elderly parents in public, with the specific alertness of someone monitoring for anything that needs to be managed while hoping nothing does. Madame Kang turned to address the space between them. "I'm going to introduce her." Taijin's expression didn't change. "To who?" "Everyone." She said it simply. "Get me Park Seong-ho's attention. He's standing by the east window, pretending to be interested in the flower arrangement." Zuri opened her mouth. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Madame Kang's voice was pleasant and absolutely final. "I want to. There's a distinction." Taijin looked at Zuri. The look said, "She means it, and arguing is not effective." Then he moved toward the east window. Madame Kang touched Zuri's arm lightly. "Breathe," she said. "You've been holding your chest tight for the last 4 minutes." Zuri exhaled. It was embarrassing how much better it made things. What happened in the next 20 minutes was something Zuri had no adequate framework for, because nothing in her life had prepared her for the particular experience of standing beside a 70-year-old woman who commanded a room the way gravity commands a room, not by demanding attention, but by simply existing at the center of things until attention had no choice but to organize itself accordingly. Madame Kang did not make a speech. She did not gather guests in a circle or call for quiet or do anything that would have required Zuri to stand at the focal point of organized scrutiny. She simply moved through her own birthday event the way she moved through everything, with intention, and she introduced Zuri to person after person with the same specific phrasing. "This is the designer who made my gown. Her name is Zuri Coleman. Not Min Ara's designer. Not the woman from the studio. Just Zuri's name, cleanly attached to the work, in front of people who made decisions about what things and people were worth." A politician's wife with diamond earrings and a sharp memory for faces said, "The beading is extraordinary. How long did it take?" 11 hours, Zuri said, "across 2 nights." "By hand?" "By hand." The woman examined the collar with frank admiration. "Min Ara usually outsources the detail work." "I know," Zuri said. "I didn't." She could feel the calculation happening behind the woman's eyes, the restructuring of a previous assumption. And it was simultaneously uncomfortable and the most honest interaction she'd had in a professional context in years. She was in the middle of a conversation with an architect whose wife had a gown commission pending when she felt the shift in the room's temperature. Not literally. The room was the same temperature it had been for the last hour. But something changed in the social atmosphere, the specific way it changes when a conflict that has been developing quietly suddenly stops being quiet. She turned. Min Ara was standing near the entrance. She had not been on the guest list. Zuri was certain of this, with the cold certainty of someone who had processed enough of Min Ara's correspondence to know what invitations went where. She was wearing a structured black dress, and her expression was the expression she used during difficult client calls, professionally composed, with the eyes doing separate work underneath. Her gaze found Zuri across the room. The distance between them was approximately 30 feet, and every millimeter of it was loaded. Zuri excused herself from the architect and his wife and crossed toward the edge of the room, not directly toward Min Ara, but sideways, the way you approach something uncertain, giving yourself options. Min Ara did not move toward her either. They converged near a quieter stretch of wall beyond the main cluster of guests, close enough to speak without being heard. "You're not on the list," Zuri said. "I told the door I was co-designer on the commission." Min Ara's voice was even, which is contractually accurate, which is technically accurate and actually false. "Zuri." Min Ara's voice dropped a register. "What exactly is happening here?" "Madame Kang is introducing me to her guests." "As what?" "As the designer." The word landed between them and sat there. Min Ara's jaw moved, not quite clenching, the controlled version of it. "You work for my studio. That makes you the person who designed this dress, the person who remade it from scratch because your brief was 3 sentences and a deadline, the person who was here for the fitting while you were in Jeju." Zuri kept her voice level. She could hear her own heartbeat. "I've been the designer on every significant commission your studio has taken for the last 4 years. I think you know that." Min Ara looked at her for a long moment. Her face was doing something complicated. Not guilt, exactly, but the neighbor of guilt, the expression of someone who has known something for a long time and is only now being asked to look at it directly. "I built this studio," she said. "The clients, the reputation, the infrastructure. I built your collections." The silence was very specific. "We can discuss restructuring," Min Ara said. "A formal partnership. Your name on—" "I submitted my resignation this afternoon." The words came out before Zuri had fully decided to say them, but the moment they were out, she understood they were true, that she had been moving toward them for longer than she'd admitted, and that the gala and the terrace and Madame Kang saying this is Zuri Coleman in front of 40 people had not created the decision so much as finished it. Min Ara stared at her. "You submitted. You don't have clients. You don't have a studio. You don't have a production network." Her voice stayed low, but the control was working harder now, the seams of it showing. "You have talent and no infrastructure, and you're going to walk away from everything I've built because someone's mother told you that you're good at beating?" "I've always been good at beating. You knew that." "I gave you a career." "You borrowed my work," Zuri said. "I let you. That's on both of us. But it's done." Min Ara looked at her for another long moment. Then she looked at the room, at Madame Kang moving through the crowd, at Taijin in conversation near the far wall, at the guests who had spent the last 40 minutes hearing Zuri Coleman's name attached to something extraordinary. "You think you can survive in this world without backing," Min Ara said quietly, "without a network, without someone who knows how to navigate the business side of the Kong family offered to finance my own house." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before. Harder, colder. Min Ara's expression did not fall apart. She was too disciplined for that. But something behind her eyes went very still, the way things go still before they recalibrate. "When?" "Tonight. Madame Kang, in front of witnesses." Min Ara's breath came out slowly through her nose. She looked at Zuri the way you look at something you thought you had secured that has turned out not to be secured at all. "I see," she said. She turned and walked toward the exit. Not quickly, not dramatically, just with the deliberate pace of someone who has decided the room no longer has anything to offer her and has chosen to leave before the calculus gets any worse. Zuri watched her go and felt, not triumph because it was too complicated for that, more like the specific exhaustion of a conversation you've been bracing for 4 years that has finally happened and turned out to be every bit as difficult as you anticipated and not one bit easier for being over. She turned back to the room and found Hyerin 2 feet away from her. The woman had moved quietly. She was good at that. "That looked intense," Hyerin said. She had a fresh glass of champagne and a smile that had gone carefully neutral. Zuri looked at her. "She came uninvited. We handled it." "Is that what you were doing?" It was not quite a question. "Hyerin," Zuri kept her voice flat, "I know what you did with the dress code." Pause. The smile remained. Yes, you do. Zuri did not raise her voice. There was no heat in it, which she suspected was more unsettling than heat would have been. You told me it was casual. You knew what it was. You wanted me to walk in here and be humiliated in front of your family and their guests. Yeren tilted her head, the same sympathetic tilt she'd used in the corridor. I think you may have misunderstood what I didn't misunderstand anything, Zuri held her gaze. And I want you to know that I'm not angry. Something flickered behind Hieren's eyes. I'm not angry, Zuri continued, because I don't think you did it out of anything interesting. You did it because you were afraid. That's not impressive enough to be angry about. The smile held, but it was working harder now. You're very confident for someone who walked into a black tie event in denim. I walked out of it on Taijin's arm, Zuri said, onto his terrace, in front of your entire social circle, so I'm willing to take the fashion loss. Hieren's jaw tightened. One small visible thing that cost her, and that she knew had cost her the moment it happened. Taijin is polite. He would have done the same for anyone. Maybe. Zuri took a step past her. But he didn't do it for anyone. He did it for me. She walked away. She heard nothing behind her. No quick footsteps, no sharp response. And that silence was the loudest version of winning she had experienced in a long time. The night continued. A man named Director Park, whose full title Zuri didn't catch, spent 12 minutes asking her about construction techniques and the sourcing of the specific silk used in Madame Kang's gown. He had the direct, impatient manner of someone used to having information delivered without preamble. And he responded to Zuri's answers with the focused nod of someone who was running his own internal assessment. At the end of the conversation, he gave her a business card with no ceremony. My wife has been looking for a designer who doesn't make her look like a catalog, he said. Call the assistant on Monday. Zuri held the card. She looked across the room and found Taijin. He was in conversation with two older men whose posture and economy of expression identified them as people who operated at the same level he did. Not quite relaxed, never quite relaxed, but comfortable in the way that people are comfortable in spaces they own. He was not looking at her. Then he was. Briefly. The kind of look that is not performed for anyone watching, that exists only in the moment it happens and means what it means without requiring interpretation. She looked away first. The woman in the champagne-colored gown appeared at the edge of her vision again, closer now. She had extricated herself from whatever group she'd been anchored to and was moving with the specific purposefulness of someone who has made a decision and is executing it. She stopped beside Zuri with the grace of someone who had been trained since childhood to make everything look effortless. Yoon Seo-ah, she said. Her Korean-accented English was precise. We haven't been introduced. Zuri Coleman. I know who you are. The directness of it was not hostile exactly, more like calibrated. An assessment delivered with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in their immediate radius. You made Madame Kang's dress. Yes, it's beautiful work. She said it the way people say things they mean, but would prefer not to. I have a commission I've been trying to place for 3 months. The designers my family usually works with have been disappointing. Zuri held eye contact. What's the commission? A full wardrobe for the Yoon Foundation charity circuit. 12 pieces. I have 4 events between February and May. Seoa's eyes were doing their own assessment. Quick, comprehensive, missing nothing. I'd want to meet before committing, but I'm interested. Zuri understood, with the clarity of someone who had spent years watching other people's social maneuvering from a professional distance, exactly what was happening. Yoon Seo-ah was not approaching her out of pure professional interest. She was approaching her because Madame Kang had publicly backed her, and Taijin had walked her across a ballroom in front of the entire syndicate social circle. And Seo-ah was a woman who understood power structures well enough to know when a calculation had changed and smart enough to adjust before the new math left her behind. It was not pure. It was not simple. It was also a real commission from a real client with real resources, and Zuri had just resigned from the only job she'd ever had. Send the brief to... She stopped. She did not have an email. She did not have a business card. She did not have a studio address. She had a resignation letter and a business card from a director whose last name she'd missed, and the promise of Madame Kang's investment, which had been made in public to 20 people and felt real, and was not yet anything she could deposit. I'll get your contact information from Sun Hee, Sioa said, reading the pause correctly without commenting on it. She turned to go, then stopped. For what it's worth, she looked back at Zuri with an expression that was less composed than the rest of the conversation had been. Something more honest underneath it, something that cost her slightly more. She's not wrong about you. Zuri wasn't sure which Sioa meant. She decided it didn't matter. The event wound down slowly the way these events do, not ending so much as losing pressure gradually, guests beginning to drift in clusters toward coats and cars, the orchestra dropping to quieter pieces as the room thinned. Zuri found a chair near the terrace doors and sat in it and let the accumulated weight of the evening settle through her body like sediment. Her feet hurt. She was aware of how long she'd been standing in flat shoes on marble floors. She was aware of the business card in her jacket pocket, and the resignation she'd already sent, and the commission she'd just been offered, and the dress across the room still catching light exactly the way she'd built it to. She was aware, distantly, of how much had changed in one evening, and how completely unprepared she was to carry all of it. Taejin appeared and sat down in the chair beside her without ceremony. Just sat, the way people sit when they're done performing for the evening and have found the one spot in the room where they don't have to. You survived, he said. I resigned from my job. A pause. Tonight? This afternoon, before I got here. She looked at her hands. I'd already written the letter, I just hadn't sent it. What made you send it? She thought about Hyerin in the corridor, about Min Ara's back disappearing around the corner when Zuri tried to ask a simple question, about 4 years of late nights and remade sleeves and someone else's name on work that had taken everything she had to build. I stopped believing the temporary story, she said. Taejin was quiet for a moment. What temporary story? The one where I stay somewhere that doesn't see me because the alternative is uncertain. She turned to look at him. I've been telling myself it was temporary for 5 years. At some point, temporary just becomes your life. He met her eyes. And now? Now I have no job, a business card from someone whose name I didn't catch, a commission offer from the woman your family wanted you to marry, and the promise of investment from your mother. She said it plainly, cataloging the facts the way you catalog damage after impact. Not panicked, just thorough. Which is either the beginning of something or the most complicated disaster I've ever walked into. Something moved across his face. That same thing that was adjacent to a smile but wasn't quite one. Those aren't mutually exclusive. No, she said. They're really not. They sat for a moment in the particular silence that settles between two people who have moved past small talk without deciding to and are now somewhere more honest and slightly more exposed. I need to tell you something, Taejin said. His voice had changed, not dramatically, but in the way that voices change when the thing being said is real. Zuri went still. Hyerin has been managing this family's social arrangements for 3 years, he said. Guest lists, introductions, alliance building. I allowed it because she's efficient, and because I didn't pay enough attention to what efficiency in that context actually costs the people she's efficient toward. He paused. What she did tonight was deliberate. She knew the dress code. She told you the opposite. I know. I should have known she was capable of it before tonight. He said it with the specific flatness of self-assessment, not performed guilt. I didn't look carefully enough. Zuri looked at him. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserved an honest accounting of what happened, and you deserve it from me specifically because it happened in my family's house. He met her eyes steadily. And because I'd like to see you again. Outside of this house, without the gala, without my mother engineering introductions. And I think you should know what you're dealing with before you decide whether that's something you want. The room was quieter now. A handful of guests remained near the bar, voices low. The orchestra had stopped. Outside the terrace doors, the city was still doing what the city did. Indifferent, continuous, lit against the dark. Zuri looked at Kang Taejin, at the face that had crossed a ballroom toward her when every calculated social instinct in the room said to look away. And she understood something she hadn't fully understood on the terrace, which was that the question wasn't whether she trusted him. The question was whether she trusted herself enough to find out. I need time, she said. Not because of you, because of me. I just burned down the last 5 years of my professional life in one evening, and I need to build something from it before I can afford to divide my attention. He nodded. No argument, no campaign. Okay. That's it? What else would there be? Zuri stared at him. Most men argue. I'm aware. He stood, straightening his jacket. I'm not asking you to choose between your future and my interest in you. I'm telling you the interest exists, and that I'm willing to wait for the version of this that doesn't require you to sacrifice one for the other. He looked down at her. Is that clear enough? She stood too. Her knees were stiff from the chair. Yes, she said. Good. He looked at her for one more moment, that same honest, undeflected look that had no performance in it. Get some rest, Zuri Coleman. You've had a significant evening. She watched him move back toward the remaining guests, the undisputed head of everything this room represented. And she stood alone for a moment beside the terrace doors with the city behind her and the wreckage of 5 years of invisible labor in front of her. And something new, something sharp and unnamed and slightly terrifying, beginning to take shape inside her chest. She picked up her jacket from the chair. She found the business card in the pocket and held it. Tomorrow she would figure out the next part. Tonight she had survived the part that was supposed to break her, and it had not broken her. And Kang Hye-rin was watching her from across the emptying room with an expression that had finally run out of places to hide behind. Zuri looked at her once, directly. The way you look at something that tried to damage you and found out it couldn't reach that far. Then she walked toward the door and did not look back. And in the cold air outside the Kang estate, with Seoul stretching out in every direction and no map for what came next, she felt, beneath the exhaustion and the fear and the enormity of what she'd just done, something that had been buried so long she'd almost forgotten its shape. It felt like her own name, finally said out loud in her own voice, after years of other people's mouths getting there first. The cold hit her the moment she stepped outside, and she stood on the front steps of the Kang estate for a moment too long, not because she needed to, but because her body hadn't finished processing the instruction to keep moving. The car service was waiting, same driver, same silence. She got in. The city moved past the windows in the way cities move when you're not really watching. All light and compression, intersections and bridges, the specific blur of a place that doesn't pause for individual human reckonings. Zuri held the business card from Director Park in both hands without looking at it. She turned it over once, then again. The cardstock was heavy and matte, the name embossed rather than printed, the kind of card that announced its own seriousness before you read a word on it. She had no business to give him in return. She had no card, no studio name, no address. She had a resignation letter delivered via email at 4:57 that afternoon, and a head full of everything that had happened since, and approximately 11 hours before the rest of the world woke up and expected her to be something functional. She got home at 12:40. Her apartment was the same apartment it had always been, small, clean, with the organized disorder of someone who works too much in too little space. Bolts of reference fabric stacked against one wall, sketchbooks on the table, 3 of them open to different pages, a corkboard above her desk covered in clippings and swatches, and the accumulated visual shorthand of a designer who spent years building other people's visions before she started building her own. She stood in the middle of the room in her jeans and white blouse and looked at all of it. She did not sleep, not because she tried and couldn't, but because sleep was not the right instrument for what was happening inside her. Instead, she sat at the desk and opened the cleanest of the sketchbooks, the one with the fewest marks in it, and she put a pencil to the first page and held it there and waited to see what came out. What came out was not what she expected, not safe. Not the carefully calibrated commercial work she'd spent years producing for Min Ara's clients. The first line was sharp and structural and not entirely comfortable, and she followed it without second-guessing it, and 3 hours later she looked down at 4 pages of work that was entirely, uncomplicatedly hers, and felt something in her chest that was so close to grief, it took her a moment to recognize it wasn't grief at all. It was relief. The specific relief of a tension that has been held so long the muscles have forgotten how to release it, finally releasing. She slept 4 hours on the couch, with the sketchbook still open on the table. Her phone started at 7:42. Not a call. A series of texts from a number she didn't have saved, followed by a call from Min Ara's studio line, followed by 3 voicemails from different numbers she didn't recognize, followed by an email notification that arrived with enough force that her phone buzzed twice in quick succession. She sat up, looked at the screen, looked at it for another 3 seconds while her brain assembled itself. The email was from a journalist, entertainment and culture reporter for a major online publication. The subject line read, "For comment, story running tomorrow morning." The body of the email was brief and professional and hit her like cold water directly to the face. She read it twice. Then she called the number Min Ara's studio had called from. It rang 4 times and went to an assistant who said Min Ara was unavailable and could she take a message? And Zuri said no and hung up and called Min Ara's personal cell, which she had because some professional arrangements make personal boundaries theoretical. Min Ara picked up on the second ring. Her voice was the voice of someone who had also not slept. "You saw it, Min Ara said. "Tell me it's not what I think." A pause. Too long. "I need you to understand that I didn't initiate this." Zuri stood up from the couch. She walked 3 steps toward the window and stopped. "Who did?" "I don't know for certain." "Don't." Zuri's voice came out quieter than she intended, which was worse than if it had come out loud. "Don't do that. Who gave the journalist the story?" Another pause. "Karen made a call last night. I found out this morning from someone who was at the event. I think she contacted someone in the media before she left the estate. The timeline fits." Zuri pressed her fingers against the window glass. It was cold from the outside air. "What exactly does the story say?" "It says..." Min Ara stopped, started again. "It says that the Kong family commissioned a gown from my studio and that my studio misrepresented the designer. That the actual designer is an uncredited employee who has been producing work under my name without acknowledgement. It has quotes from someone at the gala. The quotes describe the dress, the consultation process, the time investment." A beat. "They're accurate." Zuri was quiet. "The story frames it as creative theft," Min Ara said. "Those are the words they're using. Creative theft. The piece goes live at 9 a.m. The clock on the kitchen wall read 7:58. "This destroys you," Zuri said. But not with satisfaction, just as a fact. "Yes." Min Ara's voice was flat. "It also... Zuri, it mentions your name. It has your name attached to the gown. When this goes live, you will be publicly identified as the designer of the piece Madame Kang wore at the event. Every person at that gala, every contact in that network, will know exactly who I am before I've built anything to put in front of them," Zuri said. "I'll be the designer from the theft story, not a designer who built something, the woman at the center of a scandal." The silence confirmed it. "Is there a way to kill it?" Zuri said. "I've been calling the editor since 6 a.m. They're running it. The journalist has corroboration from 4 separate sources at the event." Zuri thought about Director Park's business card, about Yoon Seo-ah saying send the brief to Sun Hee, about 12 pieces for a foundation charity circuit and a Monday morning phone call that was supposed to be the first brick of something new. "I need to think," she said. "Zuri, I'll call you back." She hung up. She stood at the window with the city below her and her own reflection faint in the glass, and the sketchbook open on the table behind her and 4 pages of the most honest work she'd done in years, filling the air of a room that suddenly felt much smaller than it had an hour ago. Her phone rang again, the unsaved number from the earlier text. She looked at it for 2 rings, then answered. "Ms. Coleman." The voice was composed, professional, and younger than she expected. "My name is Soo Jin. I'm calling on behalf of Kong Tae-jin. He asks that you don't speak to any press before you've spoken with him. He's aware of the situation." Zuri's jaw tightened. "He's already aware." "He was notified at 6:15 this morning." She thought about what that meant, about who in Tae-jin's network had eyes on the media landscape at 6 in the morning and what kind of operation required that kind of monitoring as a standard function. "Tell him I'll call him in an hour." "He's available now." "I know. I'll call him in an hour." She needed the hour. She needed 60 minutes of her own silence before she added anyone else's voice to the space inside her head. "Tell him I got the message." She ended the call. She went to the kitchen. She made coffee with the automatic and methodical attention of someone who needs their hands to do something ordinary while their brain does something else. She thought about Hyerin. She had been direct with Hyerin at the gala. She had looked her in the eye and said, "I know what you did," and walked away feeling the clean edge of having refused to let cruelty make her smaller. She had felt something like power in that moment. She had been wrong about what it meant. Hierin hadn't been unsettled by Zuri's composure. She'd been calculating her next move. The gala was not a defeat for Hierin. It was a pivot point, and Hierin had pivoted before she reached the exit doors, standing somewhere in the cold outside the estate with her phone in her hand and a media contact already loading. The woman had not aimed at Zuri's dignity this time. She had aimed at Zuri's future, and she had done it by using the truth. That was the part that made it difficult to fight. Every word in that story, by Min Ara's account, was accurate. The actual designer was uncredited. The attribution was wrong. The years of invisible labor were real. You could not call it false. You could only call it weaponized. Zuri drank the coffee standing at the counter. It was too hot, and she drank it anyway because the physical discomfort was clarifying. She called Taijin. He picked up immediately. "Are you all right?" "No," she said. "But I'm functional." "What do you know?" "My team flagged the story at 6. I have the journalist's name and the publication. I have the list of sources they corroborated with. 4 people from last night, all of whom attended as family-adjacent guests rather than core family. Hierin's phone records show a call placed at 11:47 p.m. to a number registered to the journalist's production company." Zuri absorbed this. "You pulled her phone records." "I have certain resources." He said it without apology or elaboration. "I can have the publication contacted. There are financial relationships between their parent company and several Kang-adjacent businesses. The story can be delayed." "Can it be killed?" "Delayed is more certain. Killed depends on how committed the journalist is." Zuri set down the coffee cup. She pressed both hands flat on the counter and looked at them. "If you apply pressure to kill a story about creative theft, and it comes out that pressure was applied, and it usually comes out, then I'm not just the designer from the theft story. I'm the designer whose powerful boyfriend buried a story that was telling the truth about her." A pause on his end, long enough that she knew he'd already run this calculation. "Yes. So that's not an option. Not a clean one." She breathed, in, out. Hierin used the truth. That's what makes it hard. "Yes. So the only way through is also with the truth." She straightened. "I need to tell the story first, before the article goes live. On my terms, not theirs." Silence for a moment. "That's 2 hours from now." "I know." "Do you have a platform?" She almost laughed. "I have a sketchbook and a resignation letter." She paused. "And your mother said she'd finance a fashion house." She meant it. I know she meant it. But a press statement from a designer who doesn't have a studio yet and is announcing their independence in response to a theft story is... She stopped, reorganized. It needs to be more than a statement. It needs to be something real that people can see. Something that already exists. "The dress exists," Taijin said. She went still. "The dress is real and it's documented, and my mother wore it at an event attended by 400 people who can speak to what they saw. The story isn't theft. The story is recognition. What Hierin is trying to frame as a scandal is actually the truth of what happened. An uncredited designer was credited. By my mother. In public. Before any article was written." Zuri gripped the edge of the counter. Her knuckles were white. "I need Madame Kang," she said. "I'll have her call you in 15 minutes. She hung up and stood in her kitchen and gave herself exactly 1 minute to feel the full weight of where she was. Resigned, exposed, 2 hours from a story that could define her before she'd built a single thing under her own name, with 4 pages of sketches on the table and no address, and no infrastructure and no safety net of any kind. 1 minute. She counted it. Then she went to the table and opened the sketchbook and took a photograph of each of the 4 pages on her phone camera, clear and well-lit and real. Madame Kang called in 12 minutes. Her voice was the same as it had been at the fitting, unhurried, precise, with the specific authority of someone who has been through worse and knows it. "My assistant tells me there's a media situation," she said. "There is." Zuri laid it out quickly and without editorializing. The article, the content, the timeline, Hierin's phone records, the 2-hour window. She did not perform distress because Madame Kang did not respond to perform distress. She gave facts and let the older woman work with them. Madame Kang was quiet for a moment when Zuri finished. "What do you need from me?" "A statement. Under your name with the Kong family's endorsement, confirming that you personally commissioned and publicly credited me as the sole designer of your gown, releasing before 9 a.m. That's straightforward. And Zuri stopped. The next part was harder to ask. I need the investment to be real today, not in principle, not a promise made at a party. I need documentation of the commitment so that when people read the article, there's already a next chapter, not just a scandal, a designer who was invisible and is now establishing. A longer pause this time. Taijin said you'd need something real, Madame Kong said. He was right. He usually is. It's occasionally irritating. There was something dry and entirely human in her voice, and for one disorienting second, Zuri felt the almost unbearable strangeness of where she was, standing in her small apartment at 8 in the morning, negotiating the foundation of her professional life with a 70-year-old woman whose family ran half the underground infrastructure of Seoul, and having it feel like the most honest conversation she'd had in years. My attorney will prepare preliminary documentation by 8:30. It will confirm a founding investment and name you as sole principal of the house. Does your resignation from Min Ara's studio create any contractual complication regarding intellectual property? Zuri went cold. My contract. Yes. She moved to her desk, pulled open the lower drawer, found the original contract, 4 years old, the pages soft from handling. She had read it when she signed it and told herself the language was standard and had not thought about it hard enough since. Her eyes moved to Clause 7. Subsection 3. All original designs, concepts, and creative materials developed during the period of employment, whether or not produced on studio premises or within business hours, shall remain the sole intellectual property of Min Ara Atelier. She read it 3 times. Each time it said the same thing. My contract is bad, she said. Her voice sounded distant to herself. Everything I've designed while working there, they own it. Does that include the Kong Commission? It might. She pressed her hand to her forehead. If they can argue the concept originated during employment, the concept originated during your meeting with me, Madame Kang said, at my home, at my specific direction. I can speak to that. It's not clean enough. Zuri's mind was moving fast, pulling threads, testing them against each other. If Min Ara decides to pursue IP rights on the gown, she won't. You don't know. I know Min Ara's largest remaining client is a retailer whose board contains 2 people I have dinner with on a quarterly basis. The older woman's voice was even. She is welcome to pursue legal action on the commission. She is also welcome to discover what happens to a studio whose senior-client relationships become unavailable simultaneously. A beat. I said I would finance your house. The word finance was not decorative. Zuri sat down on the desk chair. The leather creaked. Outside the window, a bus went by, and someone honked twice, and the city continued operating on its own completely separate schedule from her crisis. You'd do that, Zuri said. You'd apply pressure to Min Ara. I would make clear what the landscape looks like and allow her to make an intelligent decision. Madame Kang paused. That is different from what Hierin did. Hierin used the truth as a weapon. I'm making sure the truth has enough space to stand in without being crowded out by someone else's leverage. Zuri sat with that for a moment. The distinction was real. It was also fine enough that she understood, with complete clarity, the kind of world she was beginning to move through. Not the world she'd imagined from the outside of it, not clean lines and straightforward merit. Something more complicated and more powerful and more contingent on relationships she was only beginning to map. She had 3 sketchbook pages and a contract with a bad IP clause and 2 hours. All right, she said. My attorney will call you at 8:20, Madame Kong said. Write down everything you remember about our first meeting, what I asked for, what you proposed, what I rejected, what I approved, specific details, dates if you have them. I keep notes from all client consultations. Good. The older woman's voice shifted, still composed, but warmer by 1 degree. Zuri. Yes. She chose the wrong target. I want you to know I understand that, and I understand what it costs to be someone's wrong target. A pause. Get dressed. It's going to be a long day. She hung up. Zuri sat still for 5 seconds. She was aware of her own pulse in her wrists, in her throat, in the specific pressure behind her eyes that comes from not enough sleep and too much adrenaline and the accumulated impact of a night and morning that had taken something she thought was a beginning and turned it into something she didn't have a name for yet. She stood. She went to the closet. She got dressed, not the careful calculation of last night, just clean clothes and competence, and the particular focus that comes when there is nothing left to protect yourself with except clarity. At 8:19, her phone rang. Madam Kang's attorney. At 8:31, preliminary investment documentation bearing Zuri Coleman's name as sole principal of a fashion house not yet named was transmitted to her email. At 8:47, she received a call from Min Ara. She answered it. "I've spoken to my attorney." Min Ara's voice was tight, controlled, the voice of someone exercising maximum restraint over something that wanted very much to not be restrained. "The IP clause in your contract covers design work originated during employment." "I know. You know. I read it this morning." Zuri tucked the phone against her shoulder and opened her laptop. "What do you want, Min Ara?" "I want a stop, a breath. I want to know if you're planning to fight it." "I'm planning to move forward." Zuri pulled up her email. The gown was designed in response to a client brief delivered outside studio premises, developed in a meeting at the client's home, and approved by the client before any studio involvement in production. Madam Kang is prepared to testify to the consultation content. The silence on the other end was the silence of a calculation happening. "If you pursue the IP claim," Zuri continued, "you will spend money and time and professional credibility fighting a case that Madam Kang Sun-hee will appear against you in public, on the record. And while you're doing that, the story about creative attribution will have been running for however many weeks the legal process takes. And every person who reads it will know that you fought the woman you spent 4 years not crediting for the right to keep not crediting her." She paused. "Or you let it go. And I let the last 4 years go. And we both move forward separately." A very long pause. "The sketches," Min Ara said. "The other collections. The work you did before the Kong Commission." "I'm not taking anything back," Zuri said. "I'm walking away from it. You keep the archive. I keep the Kong Commission and everything I designed from today forward." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Fine," Min Ara said. The word landed flat and final and small, the way words land when they cost more than they sound like they cost. The call ended. Zuri stared at the wall for a moment. Then she forwarded the investment documentation to a personal folder, opened a new email, and began writing a statement, not a press statement, nothing corporate or defensive, just the plain and direct account of who she was and what she had done and what she was building now, written in the voice of someone who was done speaking in anyone else's language. She was halfway through it when her door buzzed. She frowned. It was 9:04. The article was live. She could see the notification at the top of her phone screen. She hadn't looked at it yet. She pressed the intercom. "Who is it? Is it? Hi, Erin." The name sat in the speaker static for a moment. Zuri looked at the intercom panel, at the buzzer, at her own hand 3 inches from the button. She pressed it. She unlocked the door. She heard the elevator. She heard the hallway. She heard the knock. 3 measured raps, neither aggressive nor hesitant. She opened the door. Kang Hye-rin stood in the hallway of Zuri's building in a coat that cost more than Zuri's furniture and an expression that Zuri had never seen on her face before. Not the polished social warmth, not the calculated sympathy, not the particular smile that had been sharpened on other people's discomfort. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had been awake since before 6 and had spent those hours realizing something she had not anticipated. "I know you know it was me," she said. "Taejin pulled your phone records," Zuri said. "You called the journalist at 11:47. Something crossed Hye-rin's face. "He pulled my records." "Yes." Her jaw tightened. A small thing, visible only for a second, but the kind of small thing that tells you everything about where a person actually is underneath what they're presenting. "He's never done that before." "No," Zuri said. "I don't think he has." They looked at each other across the doorframe. "I came to tell you it didn't work the way I intended," Hye-rin said. Zuri waited. "I intended the story to make you look fraudulent. An unknown designer making claims about a prestigious commission with Min Ara able to contest ownership. It should have made you seem opportunistic, unstable." Hye-rin's voice was flat, recounting a failed operation without drama. "I didn't account for Madam Kang moving as quickly as she did. or for Taejin having a media response infrastructure that could pivot in 3 hours. She looked at Zuri directly. You have better support than I calculated. Is this an apology? Zuri said. No. Yeren said it without hesitation. I made a strategic decision, and it didn't produce the intended outcome. I'm not apologizing for the strategy. I'm here because the next move I'm considering has a variable I can't fully calculate, and that variable is you. Zuri leaned against the doorframe. What's the next move? Yeren looked at her with the particular expression of someone about to say something that cost them the high ground they've been standing on. Taejin called me this morning, she said. He made clear that if I take any further action against you, professional, social, media, or otherwise, he will remove me from every family trust position I currently hold and close my access to the accounts that fund my current life. She paused. He's never issued a direct ultimatum before. In 32 years, not once. Zuri absorbed this. He did it, Yeren said, because of you. The air in the hallway was cold and very quiet. Somewhere below them, the building's heating system made a sound like a groan, then settled. What do you want from me? Zuri said. Yeren looked at her with something that was not warmth and was not cruelty and was not anything Zuri had seen on her face before. It was the specific expression of a person who has run out of easy moves and is in the unfamiliar position of dealing with consequence. I want you to understand, Yeren said, that I am not done. I am recalibrating, and the woman who walks away from this thinking she has won something clean has misread the situation. Zuri looked at her for a long moment. Thank you for the warning, she said. She closed the door. She stood on her side of it and listened to the hallway, the pause, the elevator, the descent. Then she turned back to her apartment, to the open laptop, and the half-written statement, and the 4 sketchbook pages, and the documentation of a fashion house that did not yet have a name. She sat down. She put her hands on the keyboard. She finished the statement. She attached the 3 clearest photographs of the sketchbook pages, raw, unpolished, entirely hers. She wrote a subject line. My name is Zuri Coleman. This is what I've built and what I'm building next. Her finger hovered over the send button. Yeren had said she was recalibrating. Min Ara had surrendered the IP claim but kept the archive. The article was live and the comments were loading, and the world was forming its opinion in real time without waiting for her. There was no version of the next chapter that was safe. There was no path that avoided exposure or risk or the specific vulnerability of building something under your own name when the people who'd rather you didn't still had resources and reach and reasons. There was only this, the work, her hands, her name on it. She pressed send. The statement went out at 9:17 a.m. By 10:45, it had been shared 1,400 times. Zuri knew this because her phone had stopped being a phone and had become a live feed of consequences, buzzing and lighting with a frequency that made her set it face down on the desk and make a deliberate decision not to look at it for 20 minutes. She needed those 20 minutes to finish the second page of notes for Madame Kang's attorney. Specific dates, specific language from the consultation, the exact sequence of decisions that had produced the gown. Details that established authorship, not as a claim but as a documented timeline. She wrote with the focused speed of someone who has been recording her own work in private notebooks for years, out of a habit she couldn't fully explain to herself at the time, and could explain completely now. At 11:10, her phone buzzed with a call she answered. Director Park's assistant. Efficient, brief, professional. The director had seen the statement. The Monday meeting was confirmed and had been moved to Thursday this week if Ms. Coleman was available. Ms. Coleman was available. The assistant confirmed the address, a building in Yonggu that Zuri knew by reputation as the kind of address that required a reason to be in, and ended the call with the clean finality of someone operating on a schedule that did not. Zuri wrote the address in her notebook, looked at it for a moment, then her phone buzzed again. A text from a number she didn't recognize, then another, then a call from a fashion journalist she'd met once at a trade event 3 years ago who had never contacted her since. The journalist wanted a comment for a follow-up piece on the original article. The follow-up angle, she said, was not the theft. The theft story was already losing oxygen. But the launch. The new house. What Zuri Coleman was building. Zuri told her she'd have something in 48 hours and hung up. She stood in her apartment and felt the specific vertigo of a world that has reorganized itself faster than your internal map can update. 24 hours ago, she had been an employee. 18 hours ago, she had been a woman in the wrong clothes in the wrong room. 8 hours ago, she had been staring at an IP clause in a 4-year-old contract. Now her name was attached to a statement that was moving through Seoul's fashion and culture networks with a velocity that had nothing to do with anything she'd done this morning and everything to do with what Madame Kang Sun-hee had said out loud at a birthday gala to 400 people who talked to other people. This was not the version of beginning she had planned, but she was beginning to understand that the version she'd planned had been too small anyway. She called Tai Jin. "The statement is performing well," he said. He didn't say hello, which she was starting to understand was not rudeness but efficiency. He started conversations where they were instead of where courtesy suggested they should begin. "Yerin came to my apartment," Zuri said. A pause. "She what?" "This morning, after the article went live. She told me the strategy failed and that she was recalibrating. She also told me you issued an ultimatum." The pause that followed was a different kind. Longer. The kind of pause that happens when someone is deciding how honest to be about something they've already done. "I did," he said. "You've never done it before." "No." "Why now?" Another pause. She could hear something in the background on his end. The low murmur of other voices. The specific ambient sound of a large space with multiple people operating in it. His office, probably. The world he ran while she was in her apartment trying to construct one. "Because she used my family's event and my family's credibility as a weapon against someone I brought into that room," he said. "And because I've been watching Hyerin operate in the margins of things for 3 years and telling myself it was manageable, and it wasn't manageable, and that's on me." A beat. "And because you matter." The two words sat in the air of her apartment. She didn't know what to do with them at 9:47 in the morning, in the middle of a crisis she was still actively navigating, so she put them somewhere internal for later and kept moving. "She said she's recalibrating," Zuri said. "I don't know what that means yet. I'm monitoring it." "Don't do anything that creates more problems. Define problems." "Anything that makes me look like I need protecting," she said. "Anything that turns the story from a designer establishing herself into a woman inside a powerful family's orbit who gets shielded when things get hard. I need to be the story, not the family." A beat. "That's a very precise read of the situation. I've been watching how credit works for 5 years. I know what it looks like when someone else's gravity pulls the light off what you built." She could hear him absorb this. "All right," he said. "I'll keep it measured. Thank you." "Zuri." His voice shifted. Same register, different weight. "Hyerin coming to your apartment concerns me. She doesn't make personal visits without a reason. She wanted to read me, see how I'd respond." "What did she get?" I closed the door in her face. A beat. And then something she had not heard from him before. A short, low sound that was unmistakably a laugh. Real and brief and unperformed. The kind that escapes before the filter catches it. "Good," he said. She almost smiled. She didn't, because there was too much work left, and smiling felt like relaxing, and relaxing felt like something she couldn't afford until the next 48 hours were done. She spent the rest of the morning on the attorney's notes. She spent the afternoon on the phone with 3 different people Madame Kang's network had forwarded her contact to: a textile sourcing agent, a studio space broker working with properties in the Mapo district, and a production coordinator who specialized in small independent luxury houses and spoke in the clipped shorthand of someone who had built things from nothing before and knew exactly which questions mattered and which ones were noise. Each conversation took pieces of the abstract and made them concrete. Studio space, production capacity, timeline to first collection. The numbers were large and specific and real in a way that made her stomach tighten and her hand move faster across the notepad where she was keeping track. By 4 p.m., she had filled 11 pages of a fresh notebook. By 6 p.m., she had drunk 3 cups of coffee and eaten half a sandwich she didn't remember making and had a document open on her laptop titled Zuri Coleman, Founding Framework, that was 4 pages long and growing. Her body was running on something that wasn't quite adrenaline anymore. Thinner than that, less forgiving. The kind of fuel that keeps you functional but bills you later in specific physical denominations. The tightness across her shoulders, the headache starting behind her left eye, the way her hands weren't entirely steady when she lifted the coffee cup. She kept working. At 7:40 p.m., a different kind of call arrived. Not Min Ara, not the attorney, not anyone from Taijin's network or Madame Kang's circle. The name on the screen was one she had not seen in 4 years, Daniel Kwan, former classmate, graduated a year before her from the same design program. She hadn't thought about him in a long time, which was probably why it took her 3 rings to place the name and 1 more to decide to answer. Zuri. His voice was the same as she remembered, warm, slightly too loud for indoor spaces, with the energy of someone who had always moved through the world like he expected it to cooperate. I saw the statement. I've been watching the whole thing unfold today. Hey, Daniel. She leaned back in the chair. It's been a while. It has. A pause. Listen, I'm not calling to gossip. I'm calling because I think you need to know something and I don't think anyone else is going to tell you. She straightened. What? Hierin, Kang Hierin. He said the name carefully. We have a mutual contact, someone who runs in the same investment circles she does. I got a call about 2 hours ago. He paused again, the specific pause of someone organizing uncomfortable information into a deliverable sequence. She's not recalibrating, Zuri. She made a move this afternoon while you were managing the media fallout. She went to 3 private investors, people who operate in the fashion and luxury space at the upper level, people who would be the natural funding sources for a house of the kind you're building. And she delivered a presentation. Zuri's hand went flat on the desk. What kind of presentation? A financial viability assessment. On you. His voice was careful. It was detailed. It covered your employment history, the IP clause situation, the contractual ambiguity around the Kong Commission, the fact that you have no production history under your own name, no established client base independent of Min Ara's network, and no prior financial management of a business operation. A beat. It was framed as a risk assessment, the kind a savvy investor would want before committing capital. The headache behind her left eye sharpened. She's trying to block the funding, Zuri said. She's trying to make the funding look stupid, which for certain investors is the same thing. He cleared his throat. My contact said 2 of the 3 walked away from their preliminary interest. The 3rd is still considering but has requested a delay in any commitment pending, and I'm quoting here, independent verification of the business fundamentals. Zuri sat very still. The apartment was quiet. Through the window, Seoul was doing its 7 p.m. shift change between the day version of itself and the night version. Lights coming on in towers, the city's rhythm adjusting without announcement. How detailed was the assessment, she said. Detailed enough that it had the IP clause language verbatim, which means she had access to a copy of your Min Ara contract. Zuri's breath came out slowly. Min Ara. Or someone who had access to Min Ara's records. Daniel's voice was genuinely uncomfortable now, the discomfort of someone delivering news they wish they didn't have. I don't know which, but the clause language was specific. She didn't paraphrase it. She stood up. She could not stay seated. She moved to the window and stood there with her forehead almost against the glass, the city's cold conducting itself through the pain toward her skin. Thank you, she said. Daniel, genuinely, thank you. I'm sorry it's not better news. It's actionable news, she said. That's better than nothing. She ended the call and called Taijin in the same motion. He answered in 1 ring. She had the thought, not for the first time, that a man who answered in 1 ring either had nothing else demanding his attention or had made a specific decision about what gets priority, and she was not ready to think too hard about which one it was. She told him everything Daniel had said. She did not soften it or contextualize it. She delivered it in sequence and waited. When she finished, the silence on his end lasted 4 seconds, which was the longest she had ever heard him go without responding. She got the contract language from Min Ara, he said. Not a question. Or from someone with access. I can't prove which. I can find out. I know you can. But finding out doesn't undo the presentation she already gave. Zuri pressed her hand against the cold glass. 2 investors walked. The 3rd is stalling. Madame Kang's investment is real, but it isn't enough to build a luxury house at the level I need to launch at. Not alone. I need additional capital, and she just made me look like a liability to the people who have it. Not all of them, Taijin said. She went to 3. There are others. The ones she went to will talk to the ones she didn't. That's how these circles work. You know that. Her voice was even, but the effort of keeping it even was costing something she could feel. She's smart. She knew the article wouldn't break me. You told me yourself your media infrastructure could pivot in 3 hours. So she waited for the pivot, waited until I looked like I was building momentum, and then she went at the foundation of the building instead of the front door. She's trying to make sure there's nothing solid to build on. She's doing it because she's scared. She's doing it because she's effective, Zuri said. Being scared doesn't make people less dangerous. It usually makes them more. Another pause. What do you need? She turned away from the window, looked at the 11 pages of notes on her desk, the open laptop, the founding framework document, the 4 sketchbook pages she'd photographed that morning in what felt now like a different era. I need to meet the investors she went to, she said, not through a chain of introductions, directly, in person, before the third one makes a decision. When? Tomorrow. Zuri, arranging 3 separate meetings with private investors on 12 hours. Can you do it? The pause was shorter this time. 2 of the 3 are in my network. The third I know through my mother's contacts. A beat. I can arrange the meetings, but you need to walk into them with something concrete. A business plan, not a framework. Numbers, not intentions. She looked at the founding framework document. 4 pages. Growing. How long do I have tonight? I'll have confirmations to you by 10 p.m. That gives you, she could almost hear him calculating, approximately 11 hours. 11 hours to turn 4 pages and 11 pages of notes into a business plan that could walk into a room with professional investors and make the higher-end risk assessment look like what it was, a personal attack dressed up in financial language, rather than an accurate read of reality. All right, she said. I'll also find out about the contract, he said, where she got it. Don't do anything that gives her ammunition. I'm going to have a conversation, that's all. With who? Min Ara. Zuri closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Taijin. She gave proprietary contract information to someone who used it as a weapon that has consequences regardless of your agreement this morning. His voice was not raised. It was very, very level, which was its own kind of pressure. I'm not going to threaten her. I'm going to make clear what she's exposed herself to legally by allowing that document to leave her possession. That's her attorney's problem, not mine. She thought about it. She thought about the costs and the optics and whether she was in a position to control any of this anymore or whether the situation had its own momentum now, larger than what any individual person could steer. Be careful, she said. I'm always careful. You pulled your cousin's phone records. That's being careful, he said. Careless would have been not knowing. She almost laughed. She didn't. She spent the next 11 hours at her desk. She did not sleep. She made coffee twice and let the second cup go cold. She called the production coordinator at 9 p.m. with 3 specific questions about cost per unit estimates for small batch luxury production, and the woman answered all 3 with the direct precision of someone who respected that the call was happening at 9 p.m. and got to the point. She built the document page by page, section by section, with the same methodical focus she brought to a dress that was fighting her. Not forcing it, not rushing the parts that needed thinking, but not stopping either. Revenue projections, production timeline, market positioning. The IP situation laid out cleanly with the documentary evidence of the consultation notes and the dates and the specifics Madame Kang had confirmed. Not defensive, just factual. The kind of factual that doesn't need to argue because it has already assembled the argument. At 10:14 p.m., Taijin's confirmation arrived. 3 meetings, 9 a.m., 11 a.m., and 2 p.m. Addresses, contact names, expected duration. She read the list. She recognized one of the names from industry publications. The second was unfamiliar. The third made her go still for a moment because the family name was one she had heard at the gala. One of the men Taijin had been talking to near the far wall of the ballroom, the ones with the posture and the economy of expression that meant serious. She kept working. At 1:40 a.m., she printed the document, 16 pages. She read it through once from the beginning, made 4 small corrections, and set it face down on the desk. She was not done being afraid. She had been afraid since 7:42 that morning, and she expected to still be afraid when she walked into the 9 a.m. meeting, and she had made her peace with the fact that afraid and functional were not mutually exclusive states. What Hierin had spent years not understanding about her, what Min Ara had spent years not understanding about her, was that the fear had never been the problem. The problem had been allowing other people to use her fear as a map to what she'd surrender. She was done providing that map. She slept 3 hours. Her alarm went off at 5:30, and she got up without arguing with it. She dressed carefully, not the way she'd dressed for the gala, not following anyone else's instruction about what level of formality was appropriate. She dressed as herself, which at this particular moment meant a structured blazer in deep burgundy over a white shirt, dark tailored trousers, the gold earrings her mother had given her. The shoes she chose had a heel because she wanted them, not because she was performing anything. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a moment. She looked like someone about to do something hard that she was going to do anyway. The first meeting was in a building in Junggu, different from Director Park's building but the same register of address. The investor's name was Baek Sung-min, 60-something, self-made through logistics and property, with a peripheral stake in 2 luxury retail brands that put him at the edge of the fashion investment space without defining him by it. His office had the specific quality of spaces where real decisions happen. Not decorative, not performing importance, just built for function by someone who had decided that function was the only thing that mattered. He was already seated when she came in. He looked at her with the flat attention of someone who has seen many presentations and has learned to delay judgment until he has data. "Miss Coleman," he said. "Mr. Baek." She sat across from him, placed the document on the table, did not open it immediately. "I know what Kang Hye-rin presented to you yesterday." His expression didn't change. "Do you?" An IP risk, a lack of production history, a contract clause that creates ambiguity around design ownership, and no independent financial track record. She held his gaze. She was accurate about all of those things. I'm not here to argue that she was wrong. He tilted his head slightly, the first movement of genuine attention. "I'm here," Zuri said, because accurate and complete are 2 different things. And the assessment you received was accurate and incomplete, and I'd like to show you the part that was missing. She opened the document. For the next 38 minutes, she walked him through it. Not defensively, not with the performed confidence of someone overselling, but with the focused directness of someone who built something and knows what it is and can show you where every seam is and why it holds. The IP situation with the documentary record of the consultation. The investment commitment with the preliminary documentation from the Kang attorney. The production framework with the coordinator's cost estimates. The market positioning that sat between the mass luxury brands and the ultra-exclusive houses where individual commissions ran to months of waiting, a gap that existed and that she could name specifically because she had spent 4 years watching the clients who fell into it and had nowhere to go. When she finished, Baek Sung-min sat quietly for a moment. "The Hye-rin assessment," he said, noted the IP clause specifically. "I know. That's a real risk." "It was," she said. "Min Ara and I reached an agreement this morning. I have her written confirmation that she will not pursue the IP claim on the Kang Commission or any subsequent original work. That's on page 9. He turned to page 9. He read it. He looked up. "This morning." "Yes." That was fast. The alternative was slower and more expensive for both of us. She met his eyes. "I don't have the resources for a long legal fight. So I made the case that she didn't either, and I was right." Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, closer to a recalibration. The same thing she'd seen in the politician's wife at the gala, an assumption adjusting. "You built this document overnight," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Why should that impress me instead of worry me?" "Because the numbers in it are real," she said. "You can verify every figure independently. The speed isn't evidence of sloppiness. It's evidence of someone who has been thinking about this for longer than they've been in a position to act on it." She held his gaze. "I've been building this house in my head for 4 years while I was building someone else's collections with my hands. The document took 1 night to write down. The thinking behind it took much longer." Baek Sung-min looked at the document, then at her. "I'll need independent verification on the production cost estimates," he said. "Page 14 has the coordinator's contact information. She'll take the call. And this Kang family investment. The documentation here is preliminary. Final documentation is being completed this week. I can have it forwarded to you directly from the attorney." He closed the document. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at her with the specific look of someone who is not going to tell you the answer today, but has decided what it is. "I'll be in contact," he said. She walked out of the building at 10:17 with her heart rate doing something she was consciously not paying attention to. The 11 a.m. meeting was harder. The investor was younger, mid-40s, second-generation family money that had been actively managed into something significantly larger than the generation before had left. His name was Choi Byung-woo, and he had done his own research between Hye-rin's presentation and this morning, because the first thing he said when she sat down was not a greeting but a statement. "I read the original article and your response statement. Then I read Hye-rin's risk assessment. They're telling very different stories." "Yes," she said. "Which one is true?" "Both of them," she said. "That's the problem with partial information. It's not false. It's just not complete." He looked at her with skepticism that was not hostile, but was also not going to move without something to move it. "Walk me through the complete version." She did. This time it was faster. Not because she was cutting corners, but because the second time through a difficult conversation, you know where the load-bearing points are, and you can move between them with more economy. The IP resolution, the investment documentation, the production framework, the market gap. He stopped her at the market positioning. "How do you know this gap exists, specifically?" "Because I spent 4 years taking client briefs for Minara's studio," she said. "From clients who described what they actually wanted and then compromised because nothing existed at that level at a price point they could access. I have notes from those consultations. The pattern is consistent across 11 separate clients over 3 years." "You have notes?" "I keep notes from every client interaction I'm part of. It's a professional habit." "Can I see them?" She paused. "They were generated during my employment. They're from consultations I was present at as a studio representative." "But they're your notes. They're in my handwriting, in my personal notebooks." He looked at her for a moment. "Bring them to a second meeting, redacted for client identification, but I want to see the pattern you're describing." Her chest did something she chose to interpret as promising. "When?" "End of this week." "I'll make it work," she said. She walked out at 12:41. She ate lunch standing at a counter in a place near the second building that sold rice and broth and nothing else. And it was the best thing she'd tasted in 2 days because she had been running on coffee and contingency, and her body had finally issued a demand she couldn't ignore. She called Taijin on the way to the 2 p.m. meeting. "First 2 went," she said. "Second one wants a follow-up. He wants to see client consultation notes, redacted, from my time at Min Ara's. I need to think about whether that creates any issue." "The notes are yours," he said. "You generated them. They weren't produced as studio deliverables. The IP clause is broad. The IP clause covers designs and creative materials. Notes are observational records. That's a meaningful distinction." A pause. "But run it past the attorney before the second meeting." "I was planning to." She turned a corner. The building for the 2 p.m. meeting was visible ahead. "The third one. What do you know about him?" "Lim Jae-won. He was at the gala. He and my mother have done business twice. He's conservative in his investment approach, but his instincts are good when he moves." A pause. "He also spoke to Hye-rin directly, not through an intermediary, which means the presentation he got was personal, more detailed." Zuri slowed her pace. "How personal?" "I don't know yet, but when you go in, assume he has more than the others had." She went in. Lim Jae-won was a man who had the stillness of someone who did not make unnecessary movements. Not in his body, not in conversation. I was 61, she knew from the brief Taijin's assistant had sent, and he had the quality of attention that comes from having spent several decades deciding which things were worth paying attention to and having gotten good at the sorting. He was standing when she came in. He waited until she had sat, and then he sat, and he put both hands flat on the table in the unhurried manner of someone preparing for a conversation they have already decided to have on their own terms. "Hye-rin told me," he said, "that you're a talented designer who is being positioned by the Kong family as an investment vehicle to justify Taijin's personal interest in you." The words hit with the specific force of something aimed precisely. Zuri did not look away from him. "She said the gala was staged," he continued, "that Madame Kang's public endorsement was orchestrated to create market credibility that wouldn't exist otherwise. that the investment commitment was announced publicly to generate social proof before the business fundamentals were verified. He looked at her with neither hostility nor sympathy, just attention. She made a credible case. Zuri's jaw set. Did she? Yes. He held her gaze. I want to hear your response. Madame Kang commissioned a gown, she said. Her voice was even, and she was working to keep it that way because there was something moving in her chest that wanted to come out louder, and she could not afford loud right now. I designed it. I built it. I delivered it. She wore it. At her birthday event in front of her guests, she acknowledged publicly that I made it. That's not staging. That's a woman giving credit where credit exists. She kept her eyes on his. The investment commitment was made at the same event, yes, before formal documentation. That happens. People make real decisions in informal contexts. The documentation that followed is real, and I can show it to you. The documentation confirms the commitment. It doesn't address the framing. The framing, she said carefully, is Hyeren's, and Hyeren's interest in how I'm perceived has been consistent and legible since the night she told me a black tie event was a casual family dinner and sent me into a ballroom of 400 people in jeans. She paused. You were there. You saw it. Something moved behind his eyes. A small thing. I was there. She set it up to humiliate me. It didn't work. Taejin crossed the room and took me to the terrace. His mother endorsed me publicly. Hyeren called a journalist that night from the estate parking lot. She set the document on the table. Everything she has done since that evening has been an attempt to undo a moment she created that backfired. The risk assessment she delivered to you is accurate in its components and weaponized in its framing. And I think if you've been in business for as long as you have, you know the difference between a genuine concern and a campaign. Lim Jae-won looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the document. He did not open it immediately. Taejin, he said, tell me honestly, and I will know if you're being dishonest. How much of what's happening here is driven by his interest in you? The question was direct and deserved a direct answer. He crossed a room, she said. That mattered. His mother's investment commitment is real, and I'd be a fool not to take it. She kept her voice level. But the sketchbooks on my desk are 4 years old. The client consultation notes exist. The design history exists. The production capability exists. The business I'm building exists in my head, and on 16 pages I wrote last night, and I wrote them alone at my desk at 2 in the morning, not because Kang Tae-jin told me to. She met his eyes. His interest in me is not what I'm selling. What I'm selling is the work. It's always been the work. Lim Jae-won unfolded his hands from the table. He reached forward and opened the document to the first page. He read in silence for 11 minutes. She knew because she could see the clock on the wall behind him, and she counted without wanting to. When he looked up, his expression had shifted. Not dramatically, but in the specific way that careful men shift when something has moved a calculation. Page 7, he said. The market positioning analysis. This is your own research. Yes. Not produced with any studio resources. My notebooks, my observations, my time. She held his gaze. Mine. He looked at her with the full force of his attention, the kind of attention that feels like pressure, like something being tested against its own weight. I want to bring in a third-party analyst to verify the production cost estimates before I commit, he said. I'd expect that. And I want the attorney documentation final, not preliminary. End of week. And I want to know... He stopped. His jaw worked for a moment, the very first sign of something less than perfect composure. I want to know what you're naming the house. She had not answered this question yet. Not to Tae-jin, not to the attorney, not to anyone. The founding framework document said house name TBD in the header, and she had not let herself stop on it because she was still building the foundation, and the name felt like something that belonged after the foundation held. But sitting across from Lim Jae-won, with his question hanging in the air between them, she understood suddenly and completely that the name had been decided since the night she sat on the estate terrace and looked at Seoul and felt, for the first time, that the city was something she could move through rather than something that moved past her. Coleman, she said. Just Coleman. He looked at her. Clean, he said. Yes. He closed the document. He held it for a moment with both hands, the same way she'd held Director Park's business card the night before, feeling the weight of what it represented. I'll be in contact by Friday, he said. She walked out of the building at 3:47 p.m. into cold air that smelled like rain coming. She stood on the pavement for a moment with the city moving around her and the accumulated weight of the last 31 hours pressing down through her shoulders and the specific grinding exhaustion of someone who has run very far, very fast, and is only now allowing their legs to register it. Her phone buzzed, a text from Tai-Jin. How did it go? She stood on the pavement in the coming rain and typed back. All three are still in play. His response came in 10 seconds. I know. Lim Jae-won's assistant contacted mine 4 minutes ago to request the final attorney documentation. She stared at the text. He texted again. Hyerin knows the meetings happen. She's been informed. I expect she'll move again tonight. She put the phone in her pocket. She looked up at the sky. Heavy and gray and close. The rain not quite there yet, but present in the air, in the smell, in the specific pressure that precedes something breaking open. She thought about Hyerin in her hallway that morning. I am not done. I am recalibrating. She thought about what recalibration meant for a woman who had access to her contract language, who had financial presentation skills and media contacts, and the social architecture of the Kong family network at her disposal, who had already moved twice and had already proven she was willing to use the truth as a weapon when everything else failed. Zuri knew what was coming. She did not know its shape yet. She started walking toward the subway because she needed to get home, and she needed to eat a real meal, and she needed to sleep more than 4 hours, and she needed to be ready for whatever Hyerin's recalibration produced. And she was going to do all of those things, and she was going to do them as Zuri Coleman, sole principal of Coleman, a fashion house that did not yet have 4 walls but had a name and a foundation and 16 pages of documented intention and the absolute refusal to be made invisible again. Her phone buzzed a final time. Not Tae-Jin, a number she'd never seen. The text was 3 lines. No greeting, no signature. Just 3 lines of text that she read standing on the pavement in the coming rain. And by the second line, her hand was not entirely steady. And by the third line, she understood that Hyerin had not been recalibrating toward retreat. She had been recalibrating toward something that changed the entire shape of the board. She read the text 3 times. The first time her eyes moved too fast and her brain refused to process it cleanly. The second time she slowed down and took each line separately, the way you take bad news when you've learned that rushing through it doesn't make it shorter. The third time she stood completely still on the pavement with the rain starting, not the serious rain yet. Just the preliminary version, the kind that tests the air before it commits. And she let the 3 lines sit in her chest and do what they were going to do. The text read, the consultation notes from Min Ara's studio. All of them. 4 years of client records in your handwriting. I have copies. If Coleman launches with any client from that network, the notes become evidence of proprietary information transfer. Think carefully about what you're building and who you're building it for. No name, no greeting. But she knew the number the same way you know a voice even when it's disguised, by what it chooses to say and how it chooses to say it. Hyerin had the notes. Zuri put the phone in her pocket. She stood on the pavement and let the thin rain touch her face and did not move for approximately 30 seconds, which was the amount of time she allowed herself before her brain finished the calculation and delivered its result. The notes were observational. She had argued this to herself that morning, and Tae-Jin had agreed, and the attorney had been on her list to call. But argument and legal standing were 2 different things, and a legal dispute, even one she was likely to win, took time and money and attention that Coleman did not have in its founding weeks, and Hyerin knew that. She wasn't threatening a lawsuit she expected to win. She was threatening a complication she expected to cost. And the clients. If Hyerin moved against any client who expressed interest in Coleman by claiming the relationship originated from proprietary exposure, even a specious claim, even one that dissolved in 3 weeks of legal review, the client would pull back. They would have to. No one in that tier of the market engaged with a designer under active IP dispute. The risk was too visible. Choi Byung-woo's second meeting. The client consultation notes he had specifically asked to see. She pulled out her phone and called Tae-Jin. He answered before the first ring completed, which told her he had been waiting for this call. You got the text? Yes. We got it too. Same number. Copied to my security line 4 minutes ago. His voice was controlled, but underneath it was something she recognized as anger. Not the hot kind, the other kind. the kind that has been compressed until it becomes load-bearing. She's using a burner, registered to a business entity, 3 layers removed from her name. She was careful. She's been careful since the beginning, Zuri said. The dress code was careful. The journalist was careful. The investor presentations were careful. She was walking now, not toward the subway, just walking because standing still was not an option her body was willing to accept. Where did she get the notes? Min Ara, he said. I had the conversation with Min Ara this afternoon, after our call. She admitted Hierin contacted her 2 days ago. Before the gala, Zuri. Before the article. She's been building this in layers. Zuri stopped walking. Before the gala, she said. Hierin approached Min Ara the same week she came to the studio to speak with you about the dress code. She told Min Ara that you were developing an independent business using studio resources and that she, Hierin, had an interest in protecting the studio's IP. She framed it as doing Min Ara a favor. A pause. Min Ara gave her access to the client files as she described it as a protective measure, shared documentation. The rain was getting serious now. Zuri felt it on her shoulders and didn't move toward shelter. Min Ara handed her the ammunition, Zuri said. Yes. Before any of this started. Yes. She breathed, in, out. The rain was cold, and the pavement was wet, and the city was moving with complete indifference to everything happening inside her chest. Min Ara knows what she did, she said. She does now. She sounded… He paused, choosing the word. She sounded like someone who had thought they were making a safe decision and had watched it become something else. Does she understand what Hierin is planning to do with the notes? I made it clear. And a longer pause. She's willing to provide a statement, in writing, under oath, if it comes to that, attesting that the notes were personal observation records generated by you independently, that she shared them without authorization, and that they do not constitute proprietary studio materials. He paused. She asked me to tell you she's sorry. Zuri stood in the rain on a street in Junggu and held the phone against her ear and felt the specific sensation of a debt she hadn't expected being paid in a currency she hadn't anticipated. That helps, she said, with the legal exposure, but it doesn't help with the timeline. She started moving again. Hierin doesn't need to win a lawsuit. She needs to slow me down long enough that the investor momentum breaks. Min Ara's statement gets me through a legal challenge eventually. It doesn't stop the immediate damage. No, he said, it doesn't. She pushed through the door of a coffee shop she didn't know, stepping out of the rain. It was warm inside and smelled like roasted grain, and there were 4 other people in it, and none of them looked at her. She found a corner table and sat. I need to meet with her, she said. Taejin was quiet. Not through text, Zuri said. Not through attorneys, not through your network, or your phone records, or your ultimatums. I need to sit across from Hierin and have a direct conversation, and I need to do it tonight before she makes another move. It's not safe, I know. I'm not asking for your permission. She said it without edge, just plainly, the way she'd learned to say things to him that needed to be said plainly. I'm asking if you can arrange it. The silence lasted longer than usual. Why do you think it will work? I don't know if it will work, she said, but every move we've made has been reactive. She goes, we respond, she recalibrates, we shore up the exposure she's created. I've been spending this whole day defending the building from someone who keeps finding new ways to attack the foundation. She pressed her cold hand flat on the table. I want to stop defending and ask her directly what it would take to stop. Not capitulate, ask. Because I think there's something underneath this that isn't really about me. Another long pause. There is, he said. There has been for a long time. Tell me. He was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of someone deciding whether to open a door they've kept closed. Hieron's father was my father's younger brother. He made bad decisions with the family's money for about 10 years before the extent of it became clear. When it did, my father, before he died, restructured the family trust in a way that protected the main holdings, but significantly reduced Hieron's branch's access to operational capital. A pause. She's been managing those restrictions ever since through social positioning. Her value to the family has been her ability to navigate the elite network, arrange alliances, maintain relationships. It's the currency she has. A pause. Taijin accepting a political marriage to Seoa would have produced a financial arrangement that significantly improved Hyerin's position. It would have been a side benefit that she would have managed to convert into a primary outcome. Zuri absorbed this. So this is never about me specifically, she said. You became specific when you became an obstacle to a plan she'd been building for 2 years. He said it with the flatness of someone describing a structural problem. If it hadn't been you, it would have been someone else. She thought about that, about being someone's wrong target, not because of who she was, but because of where she was standing when the trajectory came through. Set up the meeting, she said. He set it up in 40 minutes. The location was a private room in a restaurant in Yongsan that Zuri understood, from the way Taijin's assistant described it, was the kind of place where difficult conversations happened between people who could not afford to have them overheard. She took a taxi. She arrived first. The room was small and low-lit, a table for two and a window that looked at a wall and a server who appeared once to fill the water glasses and then disappeared. Hyerin arrived 8 minutes later. She was still in the same coat from that morning's apartment visit. Her hair had been repinned at some point, imperfectly, one strand out of place at the left temple that she hadn't caught or hadn't bothered to fix, which was the first genuinely unguarded thing Zuri had ever observed about her. She stopped when she saw Zuri alone at the table and read the room quickly, the habit of someone who always checks the exit before they sit down. She sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The water glasses were there. Neither of them touched them. You reached out, Hyerin said. That surprised me. I know it did. Zuri kept her hands flat on the table, visible, not performing anything. I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer directly. Can you do that? Hyerin looked at her with the expression of someone who is deciding how much of their real face to show. Ask. What does it cost to stop? The question sat in the low-lit air of the room. Hyerin's jaw moved. Not a clench, something smaller, the internal movement of a response being edited before it leaves. That's a business framing. It's the only framing I have, Zuri said. I'm not your enemy. I wasn't when I walked into that gala, and I'm not now. You made me into a problem you needed to solve, and I understand why. Taijin was supposed to marry Seoa, and the financial arrangement attached to that was something you needed. She held Hyerin's gaze. I understand the shape of it. I'm not asking you to explain yourself. I'm asking what it would take to end this. Something shifted in Hyerin's face. Not softening. She was not a woman who softened, but a change in posture, a small readjustment of the careful architecture she maintained in all public-facing versions of herself. The strand of hair at her temple stayed out of place. You can't give me what I need, Hyerin said. Tell me what that is. Security. She said it flatly, like a word she'd stopped dressing up. Financial security. The kind I had before my father's decisions were totaled up and the trust was restructured. Her voice did not carry self-pity. It carried the specific dryness of someone who has made peace with a grievance by reducing it to its practical components. Taijin and Seoa's marriage would have produced an alliance that restored a portion of what was lost. Not fully. Enough. And now Taijin has issued an ultimatum that makes any further interference in his choices formally dangerous to my remaining position. She looked at Zuri with a directness that was not warmth and was not hostility and was the most honest version of her Zuri had ever seen. You've made me lose the Mrs. Coleman. I'm trying to determine what's left. Zuri looked at her. She thought about what Taijin had said. There is something underneath this that isn't really about you. And she thought about the years of social management Hyerin had operated under to compensate for what her father had lost. And she thought about what it cost to run that long, that hard, with that much at stake, and never quite reach solid ground. She was not going to forgive Hyerin. That was not what this meeting was for. Forgiveness was a private accounting she'd do on her own time when she had the energy for it. But she understood her, and understanding was its own kind of power. The notes, Zuri said. The copies you have. You're going to send them to me. All of them. Hyerin looked at her. Not because I'm threatening you, Zuri said. Because using them achieves nothing for you now. Taijin knows. Min-Ara is providing a statement. The legal exposure the notes create for you, sharing proprietary documents with a third party for the purpose of commercial interference, is real, and you know it is. She kept her voice even. Send me the copies. Let the investor meetings proceed. Step back. And what do I get? You get to stop. Zuri held her gaze. You've been running this operation for 3 years. Managing alliances, engineering outcomes, compensating for your father's damage with your own social capital. That's exhausting. I know what exhausting looks like. I spent 4 years doing invisible work for someone else's name, and I know what it costs. She paused. You stop, and I don't pursue the legal exposure. I don't make what you did a public story. I build Coleman, and I build it well enough that being in proximity to it is worth something in the circles you operate in, which it will be, and that's not nothing for someone in your position. Hierin looked at her for a long time. The server appeared at the door, and Hierin looked up and shook her head once, and the server disappeared again. You're offering me a business arrangement, Hierin said. I'm offering you an exit with your position intact. Zuri met her eyes. That's more than you gave me when you sent me into that ballroom in jeans. The silence stretched. Hierin looked at the table, at the window that looked at the wall, at her own hands, which were still enfolded and gave nothing away. I'll send the copies tonight, she said. Zuri nodded. And you should know... Hierin stopped. Something moved across her face that was complicated and human, and not at all the polished surface Zuri had been dealing with. What I told you at the apartment, that I wasn't done. She paused. I was telling the truth at the time. I know. It was also the last move I had. She said it without drama, the same flat recounting she'd used earlier. The notes were the last thing. There's nothing after the notes. Zuri looked at her. Good, she said. She meant it without cruelty. She stood. She put on her coat. She looked at Hierin one final time, at the strand of hair still out of place at the left temple, at the expensive coat and the careful hands, and the exhaustion that was finally visible underneath all the management of it. Hierin, she said. The other woman looked up. Find something that's actually yours, Zuri said. Stop building on other people's structures. It doesn't hold. She walked out. The rain had stopped while she was inside. The pavement was wet and reflecting the streetlights in the particular way wet pavement does in a city at night. Every light doubled, the city and its mirror self side by side. She stood outside the restaurant for a moment and breathed the cold air and felt the specific, enormous exhaustion of a fight that has ended without a clean winner, which is how most real fights end and which she was old enough to know was the honest version. Her phone buzzed. The copies arrived while she was still standing on the pavement. A forwarded email from the anonymous number, 12 attachments, the photographs of her own handwriting in her own notebooks from her own 4 years of invisible work. She forwarded them to the attorney without opening them individually. Then she called Tai Jin. It's done, she said. A pause. She agreed. She agreed. What did you offer her? An exit. Zuri started walking. No particular destination, just moving. And a mirror. He was quiet for a moment. Are you all right? She considered the question honestly. Her feet hurt, her shoulders ached. She had been awake for something approaching 36 hours with a brief interruption, and her body was presenting a detailed invoice that she was going to have to pay tonight. She was also, underneath all of that, something she didn't have an immediate word for. Lighter, maybe. Or cleaner. The specific sensation of a weight you've been carrying so long it felt like posture, finally being set down. I'm going home, she said. I'm going to sleep. Tomorrow I'm going to call the attorney and then I'm going to call Choi Byung-woo's office about the second meeting. She paused. And I need to name the collection. I've been calling it the Founding Collection in the framework documents, and that's not a name, that's a placeholder. Tae-jin was quiet for a moment. What are you thinking? I don't know yet. Something that means what it means without explaining itself. She turned a corner. I'll know when I sit down with the sketchbook. Zuri? His voice shifted. Not the operational register he'd been in for most of the last 2 days, but something else. The same register as the terrace, the same honesty underneath the composure. I need to ask you something. Ask. When this is built, Coleman, the house, the first collection, when it's standing on its own, and you don't need any of this scaffolding anymore. He paused. Will you have dinner with me? Not at the estate. Not a family event. Just dinner. She walked another half block before she answered. Yes, she said. Yes. Don't sound surprised. I'm not surprised, he said. I'm I'm relieved. There's a distinction. She almost laughed. She let a small version of it out. Go do whatever you do at 11 p.m. Apparently I wait by my phone. That's undignified for someone in your position. Most true things are, he said. She smiled. A real one, unperformed, in the dark on a wet street in Seoul, with the reflected lights moving in the puddles at her feet. She went home. She ate real food, rice, something from a container she'd had in the refrigerator for 2 days, that turned out to still be good. Water, then more water, because she was significantly dehydrated, and her body was informing her of this with increasing insistence. She sat at her kitchen counter and ate slowly and looked at the corkboard on the wall above her desk, and the sketchbooks on the table, and the founding framework document still open on the laptop, and she let the quiet of her own apartment settle over her the way. Quiet settles when you've been running and the running is done. She did not open the sketchbook that night. She washed the dishes and turned off the lights and got into bed and slept 8 hours, which was the most she had slept in 3 weeks. She woke up at 6:41 a.m. to pale winter light coming through the curtains and the specific clarity of a mind that has been given enough rest to finally work at full capacity. She lay in bed for a few minutes and looked at the ceiling and let the clarity organize itself. Then she got up and opened the sketchbook. The weeks that followed were the hardest work of her life. Not the emotional kind of hard, not the gala, not the apartment visit, not the restaurant in Yongsan, the other kind. The accumulated, unglamorous, daily heart of building something real from materials that are not quite enough, and a timeline that is not quite generous, and a learning curve that does not care about your credentials or your talent or how many invisible hours you've already logged. She signed the lease on a studio in Mapo in the 3rd week. It was smaller than she wanted, and the heating system had a history, and the freight elevator was slower than an argument, but it had north-facing windows that gave her the flat, consistent light she needed for color work, and it had enough floor space for 3 cutting tables and a fitting area and a small office corner where she could take calls without sitting on a bolt of fabric. She moved her personal equipment in over 2 days. Her own cutting tools, her reference library, her corkboard with the accumulated 4 years of visual thinking that was hers regardless of what had happened under whose name. She put the corkboard up on the studio wall first, not last, not when everything else was arranged, but first, because she needed to see it while she was setting everything else up, needed the reminder of the full length of what had brought her here. The attorney finalized the IP agreement with Min Ara in the 2nd week. The language was clean and specific and left no ambiguity. Min Ara signed without comment. Her studio was already contracting. 2 of the clients from the Gala network had reached out to Zuri directly, which was not something Zuri had pursued but was also not something she returned. Lim Jae-won committed in the 3rd week. His letter was brief and precise and attached a formal investment agreement that the attorney reviewed in 4 hours and described as unusually favorable in its terms. Zuri read it twice, signed it, and sat alone in the new studio for 10 minutes afterward doing nothing at all. Baek Sung-min committed 4 days after Lim Jae-won. Choi Byung-woo committed the following Monday. After the 2nd meeting, where Zuri brought the redacted consultation notes and walked him through the market analysis she'd built from them, and he asked 6 questions and received 6 direct answers and said, "I'm in," with the same brevity he'd used to ask the questions. Director Park's wife came to the studio for a consultation in the 4th week. She was precise and direct and brought a list of what she wanted that was clear enough to work from, and she examined the studio space with the frank appraisal of someone accustomed to evaluating professional environments. And at the end of the appointment, she said, "Your predecessor spent 40 minutes on mood boards at our first meeting. You asked 4 questions and took actual measurements. I appreciate the difference." Madam Kang Sun-hee visited on a Tuesday afternoon in the 5th week. She came without announcement. Her driver simply called when they were 10 minutes out, which Zuri was beginning to understand was how Madam Kang moved through the world without the overhead of scheduling. She walked through the studio with the same quality of attention she'd had in the sitting room at the estate, examining the cutting tables and the reference wall and the work in progress hanging on the fitting area rail. 6 pieces from the founding collection in various stages of completion. She stopped at each one. She did not make performance of the examination. She simply looked, the way she looked at everything, as though accuracy mattered more than approval. She stopped longest at the 7th piece, the one not yet on the rail, still flat on the largest cutting table, its structure visible in the preliminary basting while the final construction waited. It was the centerpiece of the founding collection, the piece Zuri had been working towards since the night she sat at her desk and drew the first honest line. It was the most structurally complex thing she had ever attempted, and she was aware of this every day she worked on it, aware of the gap between what it needed to be and what her hands had to do to make it that. This one, Madame Kang said. That one, Zuri confirmed. When? Another 3 weeks, maybe 4. I won't rush the construction on this one. The older woman looked at it for another moment. Good, she said. Don't. She turned to Zuri. She looked at her the same way she'd looked at her in the fitting room 7 weeks ago. The full, unhurried assessment of someone who had decided from the beginning that honesty was more useful than performance. Hierin, she said. Zuri held her gaze. It's handled. I know it is. Taijin told me. Madame Kang's expression was complicated, something that carried the specific weight of a family member's failure, which is different from an enemy's failure and costs more to account for. She's her father's daughter in some ways. He also believed that controlling the board was the same as owning the outcome. A pause. She'll be all right. She's been given a position in the Busan operation. More operational, less social. It suits her better than she currently knows. Zuri nodded. She did not offer a comment on Haierin's future. It was not her territory. I wanted to come, Madame Kang said, because I wanted you to hear directly from me that none of what happened, the gala, the introduction, the investment, was a mechanism for anything other than what I said it was. There are people in my family's world for whom those gestures would carry an obligation. I want you to know they don't from me. Zuri looked at her. I know. You didn't know at first. No, she said honestly. At first I was trying to understand the cost. She held the older woman's gaze. I understand it now. There isn't one. You just like good work. Something crossed Madame Kang's face that was, finally, unmistakably a smile. Not the social version. The real one, brief and warm and belonging to the person underneath the matriarch. I just like good work, she said. She left 20 minutes later. Zuri stood in the studio after she heard the elevator descend and looked at the work on the cutting table and felt the accumulated reality of everything that had built this room. Every invisible hour, every remade sleeve, every late night and borrowed credit and small daily erasure that had constituted her professional life for the years before this one. She thought about the version of herself who had stood in a studio corridor holding a bolt of fabric and heard Hierin's voice describing a small family dinner, and chosen to believe it because it was easier than listening to the thing moving at the edge of her instincts. She was not angry at that version of herself. She was something more complicated, something like tenderness toward the person she'd been before the gala, the person who had learned so thoroughly to discount her own perception that she'd handed the discounting to someone who used it as a blade. She wasn't that person anymore. She didn't know exactly when the change had happened. On the terrace, maybe, when Tae-jin said, I know you don't, and meant it. Or in the kitchen reading the IP clause at 7:58 in the morning, or standing on a wet pavement in the dark with copies of her own handwriting arriving in her inbox. Or in the restaurant in Yongsan, looking at a woman who had been trying to destroy her and seeing, underneath the trying, someone else who was simply afraid of running out of ground. The change had not been a single moment. It had been all of them, accumulated the way most real changes are. Not lightning, just weather, persistent and total, until the landscape is different and you look around and realize the shift has already happened and you were inside it the whole time. The collection launch happened on a Friday evening in the 8th week, in a space in Seongdong that Zuri had spent 3 days transforming with a small crew and a budget she'd constructed with the same attention she gave the garments. Nothing wasted, nothing approximate. The space was plain and well lit, the pieces displayed without the theatrical production that fashion events usually required to compensate for work that needed the distraction. Zuri's work didn't need the distraction. She knew this the way she knew the third bead cluster from the shoulder seam was repaired correctly. Not from pride, from honesty. 61 people attended. Not a large event by the standards of Seoul's fashion season, but the 61 were specific: industry, press, and the network that had formed in the weeks since the gala. People who had followed the story of Coleman's founding, not as a scandal, but as something that interested them for other reasons, for the quality of the statement and the speed of the construction and the directness of the positioning. Lim Jae-won came. So did Baek Sung-min and Choi Byung-woo. Director Park's wife came in the third piece of the collection, which she had commissioned for the occasion and which fit her with the particular precision of work built specifically for one body. And when she walked in wearing it, the quality of attention in the room shifted in the way attention shifts when something is exactly right. Seo Ah came. Alone, without the apparatus of the Yoon family name, in a simple dark dress that was not one of Zuri's and made no pretense of being otherwise. She found Zuri near the end of the evening and said quietly, "The Yoon Foundation Commission. I'd like to restart that conversation." She paused. "If you're willing." Zuri looked at her. She thought about Seo-ah at the gala, the calculation behind the approach, the honesty that had slipped through the composure for one moment when she said, "She's not wrong about you." She thought about what it meant to offer someone a second beginning when the first one had been complicated, and she thought about all the complicated first beginnings that had produced the room she was standing in. "Send the brief," she said. "I'll read it." Seo-ah nodded. Not warmly, not with relief, just cleanly, the way two people acknowledge a decision when both of them understand what it actually means. Min-ara did not come. Zuri had not expected her to. Tae-jin arrived 20 minutes before the end. He came without his security team, or they were present and she couldn't identify them, which she suspected was the point, and he wore a dark jacket over a simple shirt, no tie, and moved through the room with the same quality of presence she had first observed in a ballroom, which was the quality of a person who does not require a room to arrange itself around them, because they know already how to exist inside whatever arrangement is there. He found her near the centerpiece, the final construction, the one that had taken 4 weeks to complete, the most structurally complex thing she had ever built. It hung at the end of the display space in the flat studio light, and it was everything she had been working toward since the night she sat at her desk in her small apartment and drew the first honest line in the cleanest of her sketchbooks. He stood beside her and looked at it for a moment without speaking. "The label," he said. She looked at him. "I want to see the label." She had sewn it herself 3 nights ago, in the quiet of the studio after everyone else was gone. The label was simple, white grosgrain, black thread, the name embroidered in a clean hand. She had done it last, the final act before the garment was complete, because she had understood from the beginning that the name on the label was not a branding decision. It was the whole point. She turned the hem just enough that the label was visible. Coleman. He looked at it. She watched his face, not waiting for his reaction, just watching, the way you watch someone you've decided matters to you when they encounter something you've built. "It's right," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." They stood together in the studio light with the work around them and the room of 61 people doing what they were doing, and neither of them felt the need to fill the space between them with anything more than what was already there. After the event, after the guests had gone, and the crew had started the quiet work of breaking down, Zuri sat on the edge of the largest cutting table in the now empty display space and took her shoes off and pressed the soles of her feet flat against the cool floor and breathed. The centerpiece garment hung in the still air. The studio lights were on full and it cast a shadow on the wall behind it. Clean lines, the structure visible even in the shadow, the whole thing exactly what it was. She had not cried yet. Not through any of it. Not the ballroom. Not the kitchen at 758. Not the restaurant in Yongsan. Not the signing of the attorney documents. Not the first morning in the new studio. She was not crying now. But there was something present in the room that felt like what happens after the thing you have been bracing for has finally happened and did not break you, and your body is beginning, slowly, without announcement, to release the brace. She sat with it. She didn't rush it. Tae-jin appeared in the doorway. He had helped with some of the clearing without being asked. She had seen him carrying chairs with the same matter-of-fact competence he apparently brought to all things. And he had the slightly disheveled quality of someone who has done physical work in good clothes and doesn't particularly mind. He leaned against the doorframe and looked at her. "Dinner," he said. She looked at him. "Tonight?" "I've been patient for 8 weeks." "You have been," she said. "Remarkably so. I have my moments." He looked at her sitting on the cutting table in her socks with the centerpiece garment behind her and the studio lights on full, and his expression had the same quality it had had on the terrace, honest, undeflected, present in a way that did not require anything from her except to receive it. You built it, he said. Everything you said you were going to build. I built the first part of it, she said. The rest takes longer. Yes. He straightened from the door frame. That's why I said dinner, not a destination. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the first time she'd seen his face, crossing a ballroom toward her with the absolute certainty of someone who had decided and was executing. And she thought about everything that had happened between that moment and this one. And she thought about the fact that she was sitting in her own studio, with her name in the label of a garment she had built herself. And the person standing in the doorway was not the framework she'd constructed her future inside, but the person who had, at a critical moment, simply refused to look away. Those were different things. She knew the difference now. Cynthia, give me 5 minutes, she said. She put her shoes back on. She turned off the display lights, leaving the studio in the low, ambient glow of the work lights. She picked up her coat from the office corner. She looked at the label one last time in the low light. Coleman, clean and black on white, embroidered by her own hands. And she felt the words settle into her the way a true thing settles when you've stopped arguing with it. She turned off the last light. She walked out of the studio beside Kong Tai Jin into the cold Seoul night, and the city was doing what it always did, indifferent, continuous, lit against the dark. And she was not afraid of it, and she was not invisible inside it. And the name she carried out of that building was the only name that had ever been hers, stitched into the work she had built with her own hands, legible at last.